Hey everyone, Dustin here with the Han Private Wealth. Today I'm going to talk about the differences between active and passive investment strategies. Because quite often when I see new client statements, either themselves or their old advisors would be using products that are constantly being bought and sold and acting like a day trader. However, when I look up their same investments and compare it to if they just did absolutely nothing and just held it for the same time period that they were in, their returns would have actually been way better. Them constantly buying and selling like a day trader made their investment perform worse compared to if they just did nothing and held it. This is essentially the difference between an active and a passive investment strategy. For the majority of people, they invest in some kind of investment fund that can have like hundreds to thousands of different investments inside it. So to see how well your investment fund is doing, you have to compare it to the benchmark or index. Or a simple way I like to call it is the class average return, like how you get graded in school. For example, a famous index that people like to talk about is the S&P 500. All that means is just the 500 biggest companies in the United States grouped together to see how well of a return they do. If you're invested in an active investment fund that invests in the S&P 500, it would be constantly buying and selling those 500 biggest companies to try and beat the S&P 500 return. On the other hand, a passive investment fund would literally just copy the S&P 500. It doesn't try to do any better or worse than it. It just tries to get that class average return. There are a few reasons why you should know the differences. The first one is that the financial industry really doesn't like to advertise too much that it's extremely hard to beat the index in just 1 year, let alone consistently year in and year out. The second reason is that it all comes down to fees. Now, it's very easy to get the index returns. All you have to do is invest in these things called index funds, which are passive investments. Those things cost like 0.2% to invest in them. An active fund, though, can cost like 2 to 3% a year in fees. Now, 2 to 3% a year doesn't really sound like a lot of fees, but over the long run, especially if the active fund is not even beating the index returns, it can literally make the difference between you retiring years earlier or not. I made this example to show you why it's important to know what your fees are and if your investment is beating the index or not. In this example, I compared two investors doing literally the exact same thing, except investor one is in a passive investment and investor two is in an active investment. They both start out with a $50,000 initial investment and invest it for the next 35 years. I'm assuming both investors' investment performance is 7% a year, except investor two is paying a 2.5% fee on their investment to be in an active fund. So his annual return is actually 4.5% after that fee is taken off every year. In year 35, investors 50K would have grown to 533,000 and investor 2 only grew to 233,000. In the end, investor 1 is like $300,000 ahead of investor 2, as that difference in the amount is what investor 2 would have paid in fees over the 35-year period. They actually paid more in fees than they got in growth, which is crazy to me. And if you're going to pay $300,000 in fees to your advisors, they better be beating the index return for you to make it worth it, is all I'm saying. Because again, it's very easy to match the index returns as you can invest in a passive index fund that copies it and you're basically guaranteed to match that return at the lowest fees possible compared to an active investment. And like I said before, it's very hard to beat the index returns in just 1 year, and there is no guarantee that your advisor can do it consistently every year. But what is guaranteed is that you'll be paying those fees regardless if your advisor beats the index or not, which to me is almost more risky than the actual markets. If you like this video, please hit that subscribe button. And if you ever want help with your own financial plan and are based in Canada, you can connect with me through my website listed in the link below.